All right, we can get started. A couple more people are filing in, but we'll just give some intro points as that happens. I'm Emily Hughes. I'm the marketing lead at Mobilize. I'll be your host today. Thank you so much for joining us. The world is very rapidly changing around us, but we know the intensity of your work has not slowed. So we're fully prepared to support your efforts. A couple requests before we get started. One is please remain muted so that all attendees can hear without distraction or interruption. By default, you should be muted coming in, but if you accidentally unmute yourself, the icon is in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. It's a little microphone. It will be green if you're unmuted and red if you're muted. If you have questions, we have plenty of time at the end to go over them. Feel free to drop them into the chat feature. I'll collect them and make sure to ask our speakers at the end. Also, we will send you a recording. It's recording right now. We'll send it out by the end of the week, along with the recordings of the other webinars we're doing focused on nonprofits this week. Feel free to share those with your colleagues or anyone who would be interested. With that, I will hand it over to Annie and Renata, our speakers for today.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. Can you guys hear me okay?
I
can hear you.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks so much, Emily. Thank you so much to everyone on this call. We are thrilled to be able to connect with you. I know that I'm craving some connection right now, being kind of isolated at home. So this is a really great opportunity to get this community together. So as Emily mentioned, my name is Annie Lewallen. I have been with Mobilize for, I think about 9 months now, advising them on growing more meaningfully into the nonprofit C3 space. I started my career in nonprofits. I worked with Mercy Corps for several years, a humanitarian aid and development organization based in Portland. After that, I was doing a lot of maternal and child health stuff in developing countries. And then I was sort of eager to learn about other business models and how other companies did things. So I did probably the complete polar opposite of what I was doing before. I went into management consulting, specifically private equity management consulting. And then finally, after a few years of that, I really missed what I had been so passionate about originally, which was the social impact work. And I started advising startups that had a social mission. And when I found Mobilize, when I found the co-founders of Mobilize, I immediately thought about how much I could have used a platform like this, the technology to be able to recruit supporters when you need them, to engage them at higher rates. This is something that I think was so needed with Mercy Corps and is so needed across this space. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Renata to introduce herself and describe what she's been hearing from you in the community about the challenges you face.
Hi, everyone. My name is Renata Sahagian, and kind of opposite from Annie, I was a business owner and entrepreneur for about 15 years, while at the same time volunteering at the MS Society. And I had the opportunity to join the staff in 2010. And I kind of like Annie got that nonprofit social impact bug because I have not looked back since. And I was the bike director for Southern California for Bike MS, and then which led me to an executive director position with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and ultimately led to the current position that I have now, which is the Chief Experience Officer for No Vet Alone with our Life Aid Hope Resilience Initiative. We work with vets and first responders, police, fire, and 9/11 survivors on suicide prevention. So this is a startup nonprofit. So when I was connected with Mobilize, I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity for us. It kind of fits the model that we're looking for recruiting supporters. And that's pretty much one of the reasons why I am such a fan of Mobilize and connecting everyone. So with that, I think we should all maybe turn on our cameras if it's not on already and just say hi to everyone. Connecting is huge here. So I don't know if everybody turns their computers on, but hi.
Thanks, Renata. That's great.
Yeah. I know, right? So, what are we hearing from you all? Some common themes of volunteers are disappearing, in-person opportunities are closing, demand for services are spiking, and then the supplies are running out. But each of these challenges rely in some way on volunteers to solve. They are our most strategic asset, and they are our ambassadors out in the community and the universe at large, and they're spreading our cause. However, they are also our first line of defense. Many nonprofits, organizations are asking for supplies, and volunteers want to fill that gap. So what do? So a perfect example, my buddy in Vegas owns a restaurant. He's very community minded. He heard that a local food bank was short on canned food. So what he organized a canned food drive at his restaurant, but in the same time, he said, listen, I know people are hurting. So come between such and such hours, bring a can or two of food, and he gave away pizza for free for people. He had a line down the block, but it was some way that he could make an impact. Food banks, also, shelters, homeless food kitchens, put out an ask for peanut butter. Next thing you know, they are now fully stocked on peanut butter. So people still want to volunteer. They want to give their time. But the question is, how do you engage them in this during this time of uncertainty? And what's the best way to do that? So it's not all doom and gloom, guys. We can do this.
Awesome. Well, given those very real challenges I'm sure you were all thinking a lot about, the objective for today is really twofold. First, we want to give you some quick wins. We know that all of you are probably struggling to figure out what the heck to do now that volunteers can't show up in person. So we want to give you strategies to go back to your organizations and execute. But we also know that filling those gaps with volunteers is a longer term challenge as well. So we'll be talking a little bit about long-term strategies on leveraging and filling those gaps. The presentation over this hour will be structured as a series of recommended strategies with tactics that are specific to help you execute on them, with findings and data and even case studies to sort of bring this to life a little bit. The thesis that really guides everything along this presentation is that filling these gaps, when there's no opportunities, when there's fewer people available, is really requiring a smarter volunteer journey, a smarter volunteer experience that recruits and engages more efficiently and effectively. So there are 4 strategies that we are going to focus on in order to build smarter journeys for volunteers that recruit and engage. When we say smarter, we're talking about data-driven. And when we say journeys, just to clarify, we're talking about what the volunteer experiences from the moment they decide to act or want to act, when they have that thought in their head, all the way through to when they finish an action or are engaged in follow-up. So strategy number 1, it's really easy to think about volunteers as people that just show up for one-off opportunities. And we're going to challenge you guys to think a little differently about what a volunteer is, who that person is. 2, in-person opportunities are disappearing. So it's becoming increasingly important to use virtual events to attract and engage supporters. So we'll talk about some innovative strategies around that. 3, we have to ask volunteers in the right way at the right times to do things and to do more for us because we need it right now. And 4, we all just need to collaborate with each other. I think one of the more important things to remember during this time is volunteers are not a finite resource, especially when we expand the view of who these volunteers actually are. So since a lot of kind of the data we're going to be digging into today is from Mobilize and the Mobilize platform, I thought it would just be helpful just for a minute to ground you in what Mobilize is and what Mobilize does. Now, just to I want to reinforce the fact that although a lot of these strategies are enabled by Mobilize, they are not Mobilize dependent. So at the highest level, Mobilize is an events management and volunteer recruitment platform. We focus on driving 3 metrics. The first, making recruiting volunteers easier. The second, making sure that we increase engagement, meaning that we make people sign up, we make them show up, we make them bring their friends, come back, and donate at the highest rates possible. And all of that action, all of those things that we do is supercharged by our network, which we serve on 2 sides. So you'll see that in the diagram there are kind of the nonprofits that need action on one side and the people who want to act. So we are very intentional about how we serve these 2 networks. And right now on Mobilize, there are about 2,000 nonprofits in our network and growing, and then about 1.7 million volunteers that go directly to mobilize.us to do and act and who want to do something. The vision for Mobilize is really to be the go-to destination for volunteering. So in the same way that LinkedIn is the first place we go to search for jobs, that is kind of what we want mobilize.us to be, and that is the vision. It's the go-to place when people want to volunteer, and then for the nonprofits that want to track that volunteer action in a really meaningful way. Just quickly to bring it to life, because sometimes it can help to see pictures of what the volunteer sees on Mobilize and what nonprofits see. So on the left-hand side is what a volunteer would see in a typical journey. So the actions from all of the organizations are sort of rolled up into a feed organized by location. So they can search, well, they can search really by anything, but kind of event, any day, location. On the right-hand side is what nonprofits see. So you'll see things like a volunteer leaderboard, which tracks like your most valuable volunteers. But what's really interesting, and I think what's really different, is the conversion. So we're really focused and constantly testing what drives volunteers to act and do things at the highest possible rates. And with that, I will hand it over to Renata to talk about our first strategy.
So it's, who's a volunteer? What is the definition of a volunteer? Traditionally, nonprofits normally think of a volunteer as someone who is at the check-in table or handing out water bottles at a rest stop. But in the nonprofit, not nonprofit land, in corporate environment, a volunteer is someone who gives of their time to a nonprofit. So it could be a participant at an event. It could be a board member, an advocate, someone who is a program leader, your people that host your support groups. All of these people are your volunteers. However, we seem to categorize volunteers in one spreadsheet or in one group or another. In other words, all the participants for one event is housed in one location. A volunteer for that same event is in another location. Your program leaders or your support group leaders are in another, and they're not all cohesive in one list. Because if you're a participant in one, you can be a volunteer in something else. We used to do our bike groups and our walk teams. We'd have our walk MS supports bike MS and vice versa. And at first there was this big pushback on, well, they're already given their time, they're a participant or they're a board member, you're asking too much of them. But what we found is that when you engage them in a different way, in other words, at a different event or as a board member or just attending a program, their engagement and their involvement deepens, and it crosses, and they get to see a broader view of your cause and your nonprofit. And so what we feel the best thing to do is to have a consolidated list of your supporters across functions and campaigns. So if they live in all one list, and you can talk to them or send an email or targeted message to them, then they're more apt to do more for you. And so we did a study, a local study in our chapter at the time in around 2015, 2016, that we found out that our volunteers saved the chapter $1 million. That's huge. Just think of that cost that you would have spent for staff time, for paying someone else through temporary jobs. They're really, really valuable. And so you have to think about the broader picture of what constitutes a volunteer. And so Mobilize did another study, and they found out that less than 10% of nonprofits that were surveyed had a consolidated list of volunteers, which really brings back the point of everyone should be considered a volunteer. A supporter is probably a better way to look at it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that was a surprising finding that even, the opportunity is there, the quick win is there to just build that consolidated list of supporters. So now that we've expanded our view of who the volunteer could be, let's talk about using virtual events to attract and engage supporters. So let's take right now. So right now, COVID-19, a lot of things are happening for our volunteers. There are no more in-person events, or very few in-person events. So I think volunteers right now are going to assume that their ability to help out is limited. Also, there's a lot of demands on these volunteers from a lot of different organizations. So that means a couple of things. It means that your messaging is going to have to be targeted to letting those volunteers know they can still help. Also, giving people specific actions that they can actually take when you do those calls to actions. Now, a quick note on events. We tend to use this, we're going to use this term a lot, and I just want to clarify. Events can mean a lot of different things. And this is sort of where we're going to push you guys to think differently about how do we create events, actions, calls to actions. Some examples are, a virtual phone bank where volunteers could participate to call on vulnerable neighbors, a virtual petition that they could all sign and be attached to change some really important policy. So there are ways that we can not only turn in-person opportunities into virtual ones, but also think outside the box in terms of additional virtual events that we may have never thought of before to get people engaged. The last little tactic I'll share is that has been effective on Mobilize, and I'll show you how that's been effective, is building hooks. So once that volunteer has done that one action, we need to be immediately telling them or showing them how to do the next one. And if you'll see the picture on the right-hand side here is a picture of one of the pop-ups that happen after a volunteer signs up for one of our events. Almost immediately, you'll see, or they will see, a message that says, will we see you at one of these other events too? And as you can see from the data, that's driving about, I think, 15 to 20% of those people signed up almost immediately for additional events. So it's not just about kind of that one-time kind of virtual thing. It's about what's the next virtual event that we can attach them to.
Annie, this also it coincides with what we were just talking about earlier. How, if a person is offered an opportunity outside of their normal or their one thing that they volunteer for, chances are they're going to do more, and they're going to be definitely deeper engaged to your cause.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. It's a great point. I think from the findings on Mobilize indicate a couple of important things. One, that people really want to act. I think Mobilize has always been sort of built for in-person, but really also virtual events. That's always been part of our DNA. And so since we've been a company, we've had about 700,000 signups be for virtual. So we know that people want to act, and we know that events, even virtual ones, are really powerful in engaging people. And actually, we took a look at the data over the last week, and 88% of our client events that were created in this last week were virtual, and 90% of signups were for virtual events. Now, this is a jump from, I think it was between 30 and 40% before COVID-19, and after you see a huge jump in that number, which is again, people want to do something, and virtual events, they're powerful and they will engage people. Now I'm going to hand it over to Renata. I'm sure you're all thinking, how how do I turn in-person events into virtual ones? What is this even about? Renata has been in the thick of it, doing it for the last week and a half. She's going to share some ways that she's been thinking about this.
So we typically have two types of in-person events. We have our retreats, which are several days long. They usually involve in the morning some sort of activity, whether it's cycling or meditation walks, and in the afternoon is instructional. Journaling, just health, nutrition, things of that sort. And then they're usually coupled with a 2-day or 1-day fundraising ride that's open to everyone to participate in. So as we were approaching everything closing and rides canceling and retreats canceling, we did not want to leave our volunteers and supporters in the lurch, because being that they're first responders and veterans, a lot of them are on the front line of what's going on. A lot of them suffer from various forms of PTSD and mental health challenges. And to go down that rabbit hole and isolation, it triggers depression. And how do we get them to still connect? They can't go out to do their yoga classes, their meditation classes, or gym. So we thought, okay, why don't we figure this out? So we created virtual retreats. We have a yoga instructor who leads the class. I just finished one this morning at 7:30, but it's 3 times a week and it's a half an hour, and everyone, it's a Google group, and they get on there and we get to see each other, and you still have that sense of community. We also have Google Hangout groups that people can be a part of. We have a virtual phone bank that they can call because they might know that so-and-so is not doing that great today, and they can call in and check in on each other. Virtual support groups that are led by doctors. We engaged yesterday, and then we'll have one tomorrow. We have a nutritionist next week, along with someone who's talking about faith and hope, just to keep them at ease. But what we also decided to do is to involve our volunteers, your traditional volunteer, into these groups so they also can feel a part of the community. Because I think that's really what everyone is looking for, is a community and a safe space. And how do you really connect that person that they would get that thrill from finishing the crossing the finish line, and connecting with that person, riding with someone they know that they've raised money for, that is they're directly impacting someone else they're riding with. They can now do this in a group. Now, granted, they're not going to be riding across the finish line. However, we decided, all right, we're going to do a Google group ride, and we're going to simulate the finish line and cheering and all this. It can be done. You just have to think creatively. And another thing is, we also decided that the founder and myself are sitting in these as well, and then we're also offering Q&A sessions to them and letting them, having them pick our brain. How do we get to the next level, and what do they want? It's really important to listen to what your supporters and your volunteers want and need, and then figuring out how to make that a reality. They feel impactful, they feel valued and empowered, and they'll feel that much more connected to your cause when this is over and we go back to being everything in person, because they'll feel that they're so valued. And the other thing I want to iterate is that using the Mobilize platform for an event, we also have an event. It's not really an event, but it's a fundraising call to action. It's called 20 for Life. And that is part of the Mobilize. It is not a traditional sign up and volunteer at a job or I think it's a virtual online fundraising platform where they can feel that they make an impact on someone's life. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You just need to think creatively and ask what they want. And maybe they can help you form your next virtual event that you do.
I love that. Yeah, asking your volunteers. That's a really great idea for even just for a virtual event to have it be a Q&A.
Yeah.
These are powerful examples of how to creatively use virtual events in place of in-person events, but also just creative virtual events that you would have never done or don't replace any in-person events. So okay, once we have the virtual way to engage, so once we've created these virtual experiences, these events, right, we have to build an experience around that for the volunteer that calls them to action in smart ways. And when I say call to action, it can mean a lot of different things. Bring their friends, share in social media, attend other events, as we talked about earlier, donate, give their feedback. But I think the first way that we're going to do that is we have to identify those opportunities in the volunteer journey, in the volunteer experience, to insert calls to action, because the timing does really matter here. And I think also a similar point is to pair those calls to action with messages of impact. So things like testimonials, anything that shows that volunteer and gives them a way to directly touch the thing that to know that they're directly impacting those other people.
And video, Annie. Video is a great way. Video is huge.
Video is totally huge. Yeah. And the third one, I really like this one because we have quite a bit of data to support it, but language really matters. So I would encourage everyone on this call to experiment with language when you're calling people to action. So on the right here, you'll see a set of 3 screenshots. I'm trying to point, but I don't know why I'm pointing. You guys can't see me. on the left-hand side, you got your screenshot that says share with your friends. So that was the very first iteration that we did, that Mobilize did, when we were like, okay, this social thing is going to drive list growth. We're going to like basically empower our volunteers to do that work for us, right? And people want to share with their friends. People want to share on social. So like, okay, we're going to say share with your friends, ! Great. Then we decided, then it became, thanks, can you bring a friend? So it was more like a direct question, right? To get them a little closer to driving that action. And then finally, where we actually landed and where we are now, we've gone from asking them, can you bring a friend, to who are you bringing with you? So just that slight change from an open-ended question to, okay, we assume we're going to bring people, so who is it, has actually really created as a pretty significant uplift in how many signups we had from that social recruitment process. So cool to see how language really matters, and experimenting with language is really important. So more about these calls to action. So really, this is really we have to make this traditional volunteer journey smarter. So this is really, these 3 steps are what a typical journey looks like, right? So usually volunteers will discover an opportunity. Then they will sign up for that opportunity. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, they show up for that opportunity. And we all know what happens when they do or do not show up, right? So these are sort of this is the typical kind of steps in that. And what we have to do is realize that in that experience, we can incorporate so many other calls to action that drive them to action. So this is kind of what that looks like in Mobilize, and how we've inserted calls to action, and what you guys could be thinking about taking back to your organizations. So right after they sign up, prompting them to bring their friends, prompting them to share to social media, prompting them to do more by, suggesting other events and actions, to donate, and then to give feedback, because that feedback can be really incorporated in a meaningful way in informing the events that you actually create in the future. And so what kind of data? So what does this all drive? When we make these changes, why are these changes important? Why have these calls to action? So let me just show you what this actually looks like. So the sign up process, because and that has to do more with, I think, the intuitive nature of how to search and discover opportunities, but we see 20% more people signing up for an action or event at the outset. And then right after signing up, when they're prompted to bring friends, 40% of people share opportunities with friends. That means that if that friend signs up, there's about a 10 to 15% increase in signups due to social recruitment. When that friend signs up, that's how much your list grows without you guys doing anything else.
Which is huge, Annie, because how many times, can't be alone in this, you have an event and, they do show up with their friends and then they sign their waiver or their form and you can't read their handwriting. You can't figure out what their email address is. So how do you capture that? How do you market to them afterwards, or just even send them a thank you note? So this is really important because it captures them, and you have legible handwriting. Is huge, huge.
Totally, completely. Yes, absolutely. And then, so doing more, 15 to 20% sign up for additional events. As we said, when you suggest events, they will sign up for them. And then this is pretty darling. 15% of volunteers actually initiate a donation when shown the donation ask. So right now we integrate the donation ask right after the sign up. So that's kind of where we've hypothesized is the peak point of engagement. But there's also other places you could insert that, right? So if they didn't show up for an opportunity, for example, that's the perfect time to say, hey, we noticed you didn't show. We're sorry we missed you. Would you like to donate? So little things to kind of feed on the behaviors and drivers and motivations of volunteers. And then lastly, 30% of people respond with qualitative feedback. So data, I mean, it goes to show that making those asks really matters, and doing it at the right time also really matters.
So kind of along the lines of when you're given the opportunity and the list pops up of events that you can do, one of the key features that I really like is the ability to partner with other organizations to promote each other's events. Outside of it being virtual, as the director for Bike MS, we used to have group training rides. And one of the things that we did is we partnered with various other organizations, the Arthritis Foundation, the Bike Coalition, the Mountain Bike Event, Tour to Cure. All together, we had probably about 300 people attend this group ride across all different nonprofits, and we promoted it. And the bike shop promoted that, through all the different pages on Facebook and whatnot. And at first people were like really hesitant. Oh my gosh, my people are my people, and I don't. But what we found out is that several of them did each other's rides. So like your participant at Bike MS was doing the arthritis ride already anyway. And then the other thing happened where she said, listen, my friend does this arthritis ride with me every year. I'm going to do your Bike MS ride because she has MS and she supports me. So you've realized that we are one big community. And how do we do that? We here at Life Aid work with mental health issues and suicide prevention. So we are teaming up with the National Association for Suicide Prevention. They have a walk in the fall. We are going to be partnering with them. We'll promote it. So all that can go up into our feed. So we realize that, your volunteers, although you might think and you love them dearly, they are not yours alone. And so how do we tap into that community and create that environment? So 30% of registrations on Mobilize come from cross promotion. So it makes sense for you to partner because they'll see your event on another feed and say, hey, I want to do this too. So you're getting your audience bigger than you thought you could, because you can only reach so many people.
It's a really great point. And when Renata and I were talking about this, when we were preparing for the presentation, I think it was Renata who actually kind of said, listen, here's an example of how these organizations have been promoting, how I've facilitated this, like people need to come together. And it's the foundation of which we've built Mobilize, which is really about how do we facilitate partnership across organizations, because we've built this network, right, of organizations, of volunteers. How do we get these organizations to work together? Because if one organization and another organization promote each other on the platform, then automatically that person's event or that person's action is going to appear on the other person's feed. So it's, again, more visibility, more volunteers. And as Renata said, 30% of registrations on Mobilize come from cross promotion. So people are just seeing more of your events and actions in different places.
So this is bonus number 5, the thank you. So now they go through this journey. They've been to your event. They had an incredible time, but you can't forget the thank you. And you can never thank them enough. So how do you thank people? Well, you traditionally send out the email and the generic email, and they get a thank you and all is hunky dory. Might include a survey in there. But I feel you need to take it to the next level. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It could be just a homemade video through an iPhone of the staff saying thank you, and you put it in the email and you send it out. Handwritten thank you cards are huge. People, in this day and age, I know we're talking about virtual, but how many times you get a thank you card in the mail and it really, really impacts you. You can have your volunteers help you write them too. So that's something that they can do, and you can engage them. But then they feel empowered and they feel that they were owner of the event, and that their impact mattered, and what they say you value. That's so huge because it keeps them connected. So we can go to this video here, and this is one that's a little bit more polished, but that we used as a thank you video to not only our volunteers, but also our participants.
Renata, I tested this earlier. It didn't play, but you know what? We can try to
send it to everyone.
We can email with all of you. We have all your email addresses now, so we can. we're gonna send it all. We can send it all to you. So you can take a look at what we're talking about.
And then when we did a Q&A and we did a survey from Bike MS Beta Bay, we found out that 97% of the volunteers and supporters and participants would recommend the event to another person. So that means that we must have been doing something right. So they got an incredible experience at the event, but then they also finished with the thank you. And that you'll see in this video how the volunteer experience really impacted the participant, but the participant also really valued the volunteer. So it's really hand in hand, and it's just really makes for a great, great thank you.
I love that. Such a good one. You didn't think you were going to get 5. You thought you were going to get 4. We got one more.
We got the bonus number 5.
So just to recap, because we want to make sure we kind of tell you again what the sort of 5 strategies are. 1, know that volunteers are more than just one-off people that show up. They are your board members, they are your participants, they're your donors, they're people that you don't normally consider a volunteer are a volunteer. Moving to virtual events are compelling. We have to make them easy to do. We have to make them easy to find. We have to get creative with what a virtual event could be and how we call people to those. We also have to ask our volunteers to do more, because they're hungry and ready to do more. And that really means integrating smart asks that drive action into that experience. And the 4th is to collaborate with each other, get your guys' events on each other's websites. It's worth it, and there's data to prove it. And then the last one, thank you. Make sure that you thank your volunteers and send them testimonials of how what that experience, what their volunteering meant to the people at the event or at the opportunity. So just a quick, before we move on to questions, I wanted to let everybody on this call know that because you guys are doing such important work, a lot of you are probably responding to COVID-19 right now. We're offering free access to our core tier through May 31st. So anybody that is interested, email me, go to that link or that URL up there. We will email it around. Let us know, and we will be happy to, even if you just want someone to walk you through like how you turn an in-person event into a virtual one. How do I get these people? How do I build these events to get them engaged? Please come talk to us. And then we're doing a couple more things this week. Tomorrow at 1 p.m., we're doing a webinar on virtual organizing strategies. So all about that. How do you strategically kind of execute on that? And then from now until I think tomorrow, that should say March 26th, we're doing kind of 30-minute consultations. So again, if you have questions about how do I create a virtual event, how do I get people engaged? Please sign up, and we're happy to chat with you about that. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we had a couple questions come in, which we can run through. If you guys have other questions, put them in chat. We still have about 20 minutes, so we can talk about literally anything. So the first question that came in, hold on, let me pull it up, was we'd like to check in with our volunteers. The majority of them are over 70 in age. If we set up a phone tree for ambassador volunteers to make the calls, is there any concern about privacy by sharing phone numbers? I can weigh in on this at first, guys, but feel free to jump in.
That'd be great.
Sure.
We've had this question a lot, and we're seeing tons of these kind of phone trees and phone banking events happening. The unfortunate answer is that is a question for the phone banking tool that you're using. Our partners use a tool, and we work with a bunch of them in tandem with Mobilize. So our platform is responsible for helping you recruit those volunteers, ensure they show up, collect data and feedback on them, and keep them engaged. But the actual phone calls will be done through whatever phone tool you're using. That said, as I mentioned, we have some massive phone banks happening on our platform right now. We are actually in the process of setting up an organization who's looking to call over 5 million people in vulnerable communities across their state. So my sense is whatever phone banking tool you are using will have figured out that privacy issue. Annie, is there anything I missed there?
No, I think that's perfect. That's
okay.
A perfect summary. Yeah.
This is a great one, this next one, and we've been talking about it a ton at Mobilize and with Renata. Any further ideas on how to spice up or continue to reinvent virtual event ideas would be greatly appreciated. Are virtual rallies really happening, and are they effective?
Yes.
Renata, you go first.
In the short term, yes. Yeah, there. I would get your a couple of your volunteers or whoever you think you value their opinion, and get them all like in a little group chat and figure out, okay, what could be the most creative, what would impact you, and what would be creative. Like I said this morning, we had yoga. The guy was outside and it was really cool, and the rest of us were not. But have fun. Just make them fun, make them creative, and bounce ideas off of each other. And I think especially now, people are more forgiving. So if there's glitches or it doesn't look like totally professional, people will just be thankful that you're doing something. And then you can retweak it, work it out, and do something else down the road. Or that might lead into another idea to do. I don't know exactly what your nonprofit is, but if you want to get a hold of me, I'd be willing to brainstorm some ideas and think outside the box.
Annie, any others from you?
Yeah.
I've just seen so many innovative kind of ideas around virtual events. I think the signing the petition is a really interesting one. I mean, it's not as much of a movement as like a rally that's live, but if you I think the idea of working towards something, so even tying that rally to something bigger that is either in the news or that people want to see moving forward or changing in some way, that can be really powerful. So that's, I think, why my head went to kind of those virtual signing of or writing letters or trying to change something big, tying it to that big event or thing that you're trying to move, whether it's a policy or a piece of legislation or something like that.
And rallies work well, I think, on also Facebook Live. I've been seeing a lot of people using that tool to rally groups of people together. And there's been really some super creative ways of doing it, like different people having different posters and then the signage, and it switches from person to person, and that way they feel like connected and it's going towards a cause. There's a lot of different things you can do.
We had a similar question, and I think we can throw some more ideas out there. Other than having volunteers call participants and thank them for their support, are there other assignments to task volunteers with virtually? You guys just gave some amazing examples. Annie and I have brainstormed some as well. We have been reading about how blood banks are getting closed, but are more needed than ever. And the American Red Cross and similar organizations are using platforms like ours to recruit people and do blood drives in a social distancing appropriate way.
Yes.
Similar with food banks who need food collected and packaged and distributed, but all while managing social distancing protocol. They're using our platform not only to collect those volunteers, but also to educate on what this new process looks like. Some more fun ways, we work with All on the Line, and they have forever done a book club on our platform. So there are volunteers all over the country who are now coming in remotely and talking about a book that they've assigned for the month. It's just a really good way to keep community and kind of educate about what your response is during this crazy, unprecedented time. Even if there's not a direct ask, keeping them engaged in the long term will be beneficial.
And one of the, just to add to that, Emily, those are great examples. I think one of the things that I've seen has been really innovative is using it to kind of like educate and do your orientations or trainings. So I know that health professionals right now, they're in need of people, but they also need to upskill those people in a very efficient way. So we've seen people use Mobilize for webinars or trainings that actually give people those skills to go execute on what they need faster.
Yeah, and then the other thing is also, like I said, we call them happy hours, but you know, you can have coffee, but it's also we are using our doctors that are part of our clinics and educating our members on things that they can do to better themselves during this time of isolation, and how to, you know, just a Q&A with them is huge. So I also know several nonprofits are using this opportunity to have Q&As with their CEOs and various groups of people, because then it really feels like, you know, they're listening to them. And I think that's another great thing to do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Is actually we've seen high attendance from meetings or webinars live that have incorporated some kind of CEO or thought leader in that space. So that's a really great idea to get a lot of people together and get them all on the same page.
Great. Changing gears quickly, does this platform integrate with Salesforce? We get that question a lot. And we understand that's a primary platform for nonprofits, and we are working on the integration as we speak. It is a top priority for Q2, so we should be wrapping it up, and we'll keep you posted. We do have plenty of organizations that still use Mobilize and Salesforce right now. It's a little bit more manual, and we will work on having it automated, but definitely are designing it to work in tandem with Salesforce.
Yeah.
Okay, two more that came in, and feel free to keep dropping them in. We have 12 more minutes. Here's one from a theater. So they use volunteers as ushers and other important jobs. Is there a respectful way to recruit people last minute when others cancel?
I mean, I can speak to Mobilize. Renata, do you have thoughts about from your side, or do you want me to start with Mobilize?
Yeah, I would start with Mobilize. Why not?
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that when you're creating an event or creating an action, you can actually prioritize. So you can say, instead of it showing up based on kind of the location, you can make it show up based on what your highest priority need is. So let's say you had an opportunity that you needed to fill right away. You can actually make that opportunity come first on the feed and label it with, you know how you see actually on the screen, there's a from anywhere here on Mobilize. You can label that as high priority. So that way it always comes to the surface, so that's the first thing that your volunteers can see. You can also communicate with those volunteers that have attended historical kind of events. You can message them from within the platform and say, hey, we need this really quickly. Who can be there? So there's ways both kind of as you present the event externally to the world, and then as you kind of communicate with those volunteers internally.
And that goes back to having all of your supporters / volunteers in your same database, because then you just either do a big e-blast or rally the ones that are going to make phone calls to other people who participated in the past, attended in the past, was an usher in the past, and see if they can get on board and be there promptly. Right.
Our virtual events can also be set up to be act now. So they're kind of available at all times, or they can be set up in shifts where you set a specific date and time that someone signs up. So hypothetically, you could have a shift for the hour of the show that you needed and another shift that's standby for that same show, at which point you're collecting those names. Those people know they're on standby, and then you could message them through our platform via email or phone saying, someone canceled, we need you to step up. So all of that can be managed within the platform.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Here's another one we're hearing a lot about. Do you have any tips or suggestions for working with older volunteers who might not be as tech savvy? What are creative ways to help include people in virtual events that don't have access to an internet connection but may have access to a phone? I should say right off the bat, Mobilize is somewhat unfortunately for this use case, an internet-based platform. So we can't use it just through phone without internet at this point. But for those older populations that are not as tech savvy, our platform works literally out of the box, and our user base spans from 18 to 90. So people have figured out how to use it very easily, and our team is available to help. Renata, do you have any thoughts about engaging kind of an older user base?
Yeah, I mean, so we've, like I said, we have had, yesterday when we had one of the doctors speak, half the people were not on video. They called in and they were still part of it. They were, and they still felt part of the community. People were joking with them. They asked their questions. Just because they couldn't see the other people on the call didn't mean that they couldn't participate. So I would still have them be able to call in and do that. And you'd be surprised. There's a lot of people that are older that are tech savvy. You know, my parents, they're 80 and they're schooling me on something. So, but I appreciate it. I mean, a lot of times, yeah, it is. A phone call could work.
All right, well, those were all the questions that came in. So we can wrap up. Obviously, don't hesitate to reach out to me, Annie, or Renata with additional questions. We thank you guys for joining. We will send out a recording of this webinar, the one we did yesterday and the one we're doing tomorrow, all focused on nonprofit virtual organizing by the end of the week. We also will be sending out a new landing page. You guys are the first to hear about it. It's launching tonight, which will have all of our resources and news for kind of navigating this volunteer management during COVID-19. And we will follow up with the ability to consult directly with someone from our team about how to put these 4 strategies into place directly within your organization. Spoiler alert, that person will probably be Annie. Overall, your passion and generosity are exactly what the world needs right now. And we are really grateful at this opportunity to support you. Please take advantage of the free access to our core platform if you are doing COVID-19 relief work. That is a main priority for us right now and for everybody. And we want to make sure you're successful. So with that, I'll end the call. Thank you so much, Annie.
Thank
you, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.